Okay, so I think we're going to make some science now.
We're gonna mix up some recipes.
Okay.
So the whole idea of mixing up these different formulas, this is kind of how I cook. It's like I look in the cabinet and I see what I have.
Okay.
So my recipes differ. And depending on, I need to use up some of this or some of that.
Are you pretty good about recording them though? What
Um,
you have done in the past and what you thought of it or anything?
well, it's recorded up here.
Oh, that's good.
But
For the
I
time
have
being.
written some formulas. In fact, in the last book, there were some formulas in there. I think in the last 2 books, I have different formulas. But this is really about understanding what will make those formulas work. So as we talked about previously, it has to do with the viscosity, the runniness of something, and the sheen. So depending on how shiny or matte you want it, we're going to mix something up.
Okay.
So what I have here are some small cups, and we're going to put some lines on them, divide them about, let's see, I'll start off here, maybe about 3 different
Okay.
levels. So you can do that. And I'm just going to mix up the spreadable one first, and I'll show you, this is the consistency. So you can see it's very much like one of our gels.
Okay.
And this is already mixed up, and I'll show you how I did this one. So basically, we're going to be working with more of the gels. We're going to use some soft gel, which is the soft gel gloss. So I want you to take this and put amount into the first line.
Ooh, it's kind of like a lot.
Well, we're just going to kind of divide it into 3s.
Okay.
So maybe 2 knifeluls or 3 knifeluls of that. So I have to look at my recipe.
And each of them are just in this one to start?
Just in that one.
Okay.
Okay, so you did about 3 knifeluls.
Yeah, yep.
Now we're going to use the extra heavy, or the heavy gel matte.
Okay.
So we've got a gloss and we've got a matte.
So I'm putting this one in the same one?
Correct.
And about the same amount?
Equal amounts. Now if you wanted to change this, if you wanted it to be a little bit more glossy, then you would add a little bit more gloss, less matte. If you wanted it to be more matte, then you can, vary those amounts, just depending on the sheen. But I start out with equal amounts.
Okay.
And then we're also going to just put some water into there.
Okay.
So you might want to mix those 2 together first. And we're going to add water to get the consistency where it's going to be spreadable, but not too fluid, because we want this to stand up. So I'm going to add just a little. Isn't this like a cooking show?
It is. I love cooking shows.
That looks about like the right amount. So you can see I just put a little bit of dab of water in there. And with these acrylic gels and pastes, if you have them over time, they tend to thicken a little bit because some of the moisture will evaporate. So if you have a newer product, you may put less water.
Okay.
Just a tip
It's really
to
the
know.
final consistency that we're seeking here. Okay.
So do you see how that is, you could even, maybe it's easier to mix with the craft or,
Take that one.
yeah. So we're going to set that aside when you get that mixed up, and I'm going to show you the pourable
So do you kind of have a name for this
for that particular
concoction?
Spreadable, Faux Encaustic. But I will give different sheens, and I'll talk about, like, if you wanted this, we'll put it on and we'll see what it looks like. If you wanted it to be more opaque, you could put in some of that extra heavy gel molding paste. So the options are pretty much endless. That's why I say pick a few to begin with that you're going to use in other things, and then just start to think of gloss and matte.
Okay.
And you could do it with the gels, but if you wanted it more opaque, that's when you would add a paste in.
Right.
Okay. So now we're going to do some spreadable or pourable ones.
Okay.
And that has more to do with the consistency. So we're going to start with more fluid medium. So we're going to start with some polymer medium, which you might want to show them. And
just pour it into the,
Yeah,
the first
just-
line?
well, or just a little bit, because we're going to do, that's good. I'll clean that off for you. Now this is a fluid matte medium.
fluid matte medium. And about an equal amount of that.
Right. We're working with half and half right now. And as I said, as you get used to this, you can then adjust your levels accordingly.
Okay.
So we're going to add a little bit of water to that, just a tiny little bit, and mix that up. That's probably good. And you could keep it that consistency if you wanted it to be a little bit more wax-like. So we can add a little bit of the soft gel gloss so it's not quite so runny,
Okay.
but it's still pourable.
Okay.
And again, you can add your quantities according to how thick or thin you want it.
Okay.
And just get that stirred up. So that's Faux Encaustic Formula 1.
It sounded like everything had to have a name. Yeah, okay.
Faux Encaustic Formula 2, it's a little bit simpler. So we're just going to use the fluid matte medium. And you can put that in there. And we're going to be putting 2 ingredients in. So you could put a little bit more of that in. And now you get to play with this one. You didn't get to play with
Oh, yeah, the
before.
self-leveling gel?
Yeah. So you can squeeze that in there about an equal amount. Okay. Now this one is glossy. It's going to dry clear and glossy. So I'm going to mix these two together. And so you're mixing, again, you're mixing the matte with the gloss, and you're going to get this kind of satin finish.
Okay.
But
I like that.
the great thing about mixing your own formulas, rather than buying, like, here's the semi-gloss or the matte, and just doing it that way, you have control over how...
You can really customize it. And you
Right.
can experiment until you find the right ratios and just
Exactly.
the exact right look for you.
And you can get the exact consistency you want, the viscosity, spreadable or pourable. The other thing you can do, a lot of people like to add a tiny, tiny drop of color to it.
Right.
I find that for me, building the layers, I would rather add the color on top of the dried layer rather than adding it to the paint. And that way I can get different colors in different areas. So let's take a look at what these look like and why would you use a spreadable instead of a pourable.
Okay.
There's also one other product I want to talk about. This is just a Liquitex matte, ultra matte medium.
Okay.
And so it's very, very muted like this. This is just
So this is the product over this
This is the
painting?
product, just a
Okay.
straight product put on with a knife.
Okay.
And so you can see how much it obscures.
And you can see some of the knife lines in there too.
Right. Now I took and I diluted the same product with some water and I brushed it on. So you actually see a little bit more of the painting, you see more of the brush strokes.
Okay.
This was very glossy, and then I just took a fluid matte medium and put over it. So it really pushes that
So
gloss
that was
back.
kind of this one that you used on here,
right.
and variations on this one
On
for
this
here.
one.
Okay.
So you don't have to have these special formulas. You can actually just use straight
Right.
products. But remember, we're building these layers. And so if you started off this,
This is really going to push that first layer into the background if
Right.
you use it on a first layer.
Right.
So for my aesthetic, I'd probably want to save something like this until at least a middle layer.
Right.
Maybe even one of the later or final layers.
right. And it's really the layers and the sheen. It's not so much this actual wax look.
Right.
But everybody's different, so I
Right.
wanted to show you all these different possibilities.
Okay.
Now here's a panel that has, it's a texture on it.
Right.
that was
These are
done-
these little squares are raised. I can feel them. Just these.
So
Yeah,
if
just
we
this.
put the pourable on here, it's going to want to flatten out and it's not going to cover this as much. So
Okay.
this is where we would use the spreadable.
Okay.
And you could take your knife and just, I'll have you just put it on this area from that one.
From this
Spread it on. She remembers now. You put it on the bottom,
Over the whole area or just part of it?
just in that area where those pieces are raised.
Wow,
Looks
you
like
can
there's
really
something in there. So
Yeah,
you
it's a
get it
little
out.
thick.
But you need it to be thick to
Right.
cover that.
Maybe I didn't do a great job mixing it or something.
I think there might be a little something in there.
Yeah. But you can really see it filling up that.
That's the thing. So go ahead and get that out.
You can
Yeah,
really
so
see
it's
it
gonna
fill
do-
in those spaces.
And
I
before
can
you do
feel it
that, let's
swirling
just,
in.
I'll show you what would happen if you put the Pourable on and you tried to cover that up. It's just gonna flatten out. You're not gonna get the same
Do I
kind of
have to kind of
coverage.
spread it
Yeah.
out?
So you see the difference of why you would use one.
And they're
versus
both
the
going
other.
to dry clear, so
They're both gonna dry clear, but diffused, more matte, not
that's
glossy.
interesting.
So these are the reasons why you would make a Pourable or you would make a Spreadable.
Cool.
And this is just one of the layers, and then every time you add something to a layer, I like to put a little bit of paint or a transfer or a texture, let that dry, then you add another layer. You keep building, even if you don't put it over the whole surface, even if it's just a little something right there.
So thinking of it in that terms, as you describe it, I can see why somebody might want to put in like a drop of color or something and end up with kind of a glaze. But yeah, you might end up losing that
You could.
as you continue to build.
And remember back when we talked about the how transparent paints were or opaque paints? At this point, you might want to just add a drop of, and that was literally one drop,
Yep.
of the
I see
quinacridone gold, which is a very transparent paint. And you can see how it
really
makes
pretty.
it look like kind of a beeswax that's not refined.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And then this one, you can just pour over the surface. And just pour it up on this part.
On this part here?
Up
Or
here.
up here, yeah. That's what I was doing. Hello.
Put a little bit more on there. It's not quite mixed as well, but if you do this, you see how it's almost like wax.
Yeah,
And
it
you
could
can
use
get
a little
those-
better mixing though, I would agree.
You can get that
Get the
soft,
idea.
that soft edge like you
Uh-huh.
would with wax.
Oh, yeah, that's nice.
So let's just say you have something like that. What's a way to get rid of it? And you would
Yeah,
just,
just continue to kind of mix it
Mix
in.
it
It's just
on
going to
there.
flow back over itself.
right. So nothing is ever a problem. It just gives you another way to create. So I always say, you always get a reaction. It may not be the one you thought you were
Well, I
going to
don't
get,
necessarily
but you get a
expect it.
reaction. And this is a way to learn. So I really encourage you to experiment with this.
Play.
Yeah.
Art class.
But this is what I love about these soft edges and getting that layer and that movement in. This is a nice finishing one too, to
Definitely.
top off your painting. So the thing about these, then you have to wait for this to dry. And
Right.
then you add more layers. So I'll be talking later about how we work on multiples.
And the drying time can vary based on a number of elements. I know, like you said, where you live in New Mexico, it really won't take that much time. Like, how long do you think something like that would take?
Well, if it were in the summer, it would probably dry, something that thickness would dry in a half hour
Wow.
to an hour.
Here,
Here,
we've got the rumbling thunder and the heavy rains today. So this would probably take,
tomorrow.
that's honestly what I thought. I figured it would take much
Well,
longer.
I don't think, it wouldn't take till tomorrow, but the other part, the thinner, the Pourable, is
Right,
gonna
right.
dry faster than the
That makes sense,
Spreadable.
yeah, of course. And you can probably get a sense of the progress of drying because the layer beneath becomes more visible since we're
Exactly.
talking at least here about
You see where
transparent
it's
layers.
white, so when that dries, it would be clear. But when you have a gel that's piled up like that, it's gonna take it longer to dry. If you took that and spread it out, it's gonna dry faster. The other thing is, I don't like to force dry this because what would happen is you might get some cracks in it. But I'll show you some other ways to get intentional cracks.
Okay, and did you have one or two other options or materials you wanted to talk about?
I did, and this is a product, it's called Decapage, and I really love this because one of the things about working with acrylic is it has kind of a tacky or a sticky
Right,
finish on it.
right.
And you have to be really careful that if you put two parts of acrylic together, they'll stick together. So what this does, it's created, I think, for like scrapbooking if you wanted to use acrylic in book pages to keep it from sticking together. They make it in a gloss and a matte finish. And I brought the matte because it makes it look more like wax.
Okay.
And when you put that on, it'll also give it a tooth, which is very similar. If you want, I'll trade you this one for that other panel. It gives it a tooth that's similar to this, where you can actually go in and draw on here. Whereas if you try to draw on
some of that gloss,
you see
okay.
it doesn't
Yeah,
work.
yeah.
So this is another great way to add this element that you can build these layers.